The title of this presentation is Drowning Resistant Guidelines, and I'll get to that in a minute. There are between 1 and 3 million drowning deaths in the world annually, depending upon whose figures you take and how the criteria are put together. But you can say for certainty that there are at least 1 million drowning deaths, and possibly in certain circumstances, on occasions when there are major disasters, can be 3 million plus. We are told by epidemiologists that for every one person who drowns, 4 are injured. They survive a drowning event, but they are injured, and that can range from being epileptic through to being paraplegic to living in a permanent vegetative state. So therefore we have 1 to 3 million deaths, 4 to 12 million survival injuries, which gives us at the base of the pyramid between 5 and 15 million drowning events annually, when you take the definition of drowning as being immersion or submersion, respiratory impairment as a consequence of immersion or submersion in a fluid or a liquid. So that's the scale of the problem. The idea for the drowning resistant guidelines came from the work that I've been doing with the International Open Water Drowning Prevention Task Force, where we were, as I had said previously, distilling the water safety information that was available worldwide to see if we could put together some guidelines that were applicable in almost all circumstances. And it struck me that these are open water, but all people don't drown in open water. And so the inspiration for the drowning resistant guidelines came from my raincoat, which has a label on the back which tells me that it is water resistant. Not waterproof, it's not an oilskin. It just says that it will keep me dry long enough in a shower to get in out of the rain until the weather stops, until the rain stops. So it is my belief that in many drowning situations, all that is required is for the casualty to stay alive, to stay conscious, to avoid panicking for a short enough period to either self-help or to be rescued by another. I believe that there's a combination of three items. Some skills, like being able to swim, being able to float. Some experience, like swimming in cold water, like swimming in clothing. And knowledge, understanding that if you fall into cold water, you will experience breathing difficulty. It can be quite severe, but you're not having a heart attack, and it will pass within a short period, and therefore there is no need to panic. So my belief is it's a combination of all these, and you will see that the arrows are both ways with a plus in the middle, meaning that the totality of all three far exceeds the individual benefit. A nice picture of a mother with a child. I'm going to take you back to 1965. I was studying at home 1965 for my exams. I was 14 years old. There was an urgent banging on our front door. It was at night. I went down the stairs from my room down into the hallway to find my mother there, my father there, a brother, sister, and one of our neighbours holding her infant child limp in her arms. My mother picked up the infant, handed him to me and said, "He's not breathing, save him." It was an instruction. The reason she did that was because I had, for 2 years, been a member of the Order of Malta Ambulance Corps. She knew that I was trained in CPR. I knew that in most cases where an infant stops breathing, the cause is a blocked airway. So, turned the child over, some slaps on the back, piece of food or something fell out onto the ground, lifted the child up, checked the airway, still wasn't breathing, gave some puffs, child started breathing, was handed back to the mum. There was my mother, my father, brother, sister, the child's mum, all standing in the hallway. I was the only person who knew what to do. The difference between having a dead infant and a living infant was the knowledge and the experience. So I had never actually resuscitated a baby before. I had trained on a resuscian, but there were no resusci babies. These were things of the future. But I had practiced on a doll, and I had practiced clearing an airway. So the reason I'm doing this is that the infant was returned to the mother. While I was doing this, my father had gone next door and arranged transport, so mother and infant were taken to hospital. I tell you this because we have to start out with an assumption that no matter how careful we are, that there are times when things will go wrong. So therefore, the ability to perform CPR is a key ability, because when your child stops breathing, when someone you care about stops breathing, if you don't have the ability to resuscitate them, then they have no chance at all. You cannot depend on someone else doing it. So, almost starting at the end, but saying one of the key overall things, one of the key skills is the ability to perform CPR. I'm going to take you forward 20 years, 1985. I was serving my second year as president of the Royal Lifesaving Society in Ireland, and I had decided that there was very little knowledge about drowning, because on first aid courses, drowning is just one small part of resuscitation, and the main focus was on heart attacks. And so I had started working with fire service, and that's me. This is young me, less the beard. It started training and there's me again, training the local fire service, firemen. Training them in CPR, training them in river rescue. Remember, these were the men who had responsibility for removing the bodies, but they didn't have the ability to save themselves if they went in. And everything was going very well. I had established relationships with the local first aid organisations, and they were interested because it gave them something different in their training programs. And then this happened. Rock Hudson went and kissed Elizabeth Taylor. He was known to have AIDS, and you had this whole furore, this whole thing about whether or not it was possible to transfer AIDS from one person to another through a kiss. And it turned out that there was a drop in people who were learning a CPR. You would run a first aid course, and then people would skip the mannequin practice because there was this fear that through saliva there would be a transference. And so I issued a newsletter, a small little thing that was picked up by a national newspaper. And suddenly, this is only one good thing. The big thing is that on a low news day, that's the daily paper, the evening paper ran in 1-foot-high headlines. Hundreds to die from AIDS. And it goes, you can read it. No one bothered to actually read or pay attention to what I was actually saying. What I was saying was that if you have the ability to perform CPR, then you have a choice. Will I or won't I? But if you don't know how to perform CPR, you have no choice. And that if people didn't have that ability, then people who were currently being resuscitated would not be resuscitated. I phoned up the editor. He said, these are life-saving. CPR is a life-saving skill. So therefore, hundreds will drown. The fact that you were talking about not learning CPR was completely different to people not attending life-saving classes. And I got into a whole load of trouble until I was nominated as Moron of the Month by the local newspaper. The national newspaper, Moron of the Month. And it went away until, but it wasn't forgotten, because some months later I received a phone call from a representative of a national newspaper group asking me if I would be interested in acting as a drowning expert and giving advice to them. And I had moved from being a moron to being an expert in a very short number of weeks. And what he was offering was that when a drowning occurred, a reporter would phone me with the details, would discuss what he knew had happened, and I would suggest questions he would ask, or I would give some advice. And there was no money in it, but the payoff, I was told, would be that the newspaper, without the group, would publish water safety advice. But I didn't know how newspapers worked. And the fact that then newspaper reporters didn't actually, what they wrote didn't go directly into the newspaper. They submitted their copy or their report to a sub-editor, to an office where you had a group of people as they are sitting here, and each one of them would have a page, and his job was to fit that news into a page. And very often, when space was tight, what was cut was the water safety advice. But I wasn't discouraged, because in speaking to the newspaper reporters, I was getting a lot of detail that was not being published. And I saw that as a payoff until one particular incident after about 2.5 years when I lost it. To be honest with you, that's the only way to say it. I lost it, and this was the circumstances. A newspaper reporter who I had grown quite friendly with phoned me and said that a drowning incident had taken place where 3 members of one family, the grandfather, father, and grandson, had been fishing on the bank of a lake. All 3 had drowned. There were fishermen in a boat who had observed what had happened, but were too far away to do anything. And what actually had happened was that the son, the boy, had fallen in. The father had jumped in to rescue the boy. The father was wearing waders. The grandfather had jumped in to rescue the father. All 3 were found within about 4 to 6 feet. And what hit me was that the reporter all he had to do was take the fishing rod, reverse it, reach it out and pull in the boy. No one need have drowned. And I said, I can't do this. And he said, if you don't do this, he said, they won't ask you again. I said, I'm not going to tell 2 women who have lost their husbands and their sons that it was all totally unnecessary. And he was right. My days as a drowning expert commenting on the newspapers were over. But I had found out a couple of things. One was that many drownings are predictable and they're therefore avoidable. The examples being that if you leave children unsupervised around water, some are going to fall in. If you have youths and alcohol around the water with horseplay, they're going to jump in. As such, so if you're a fisherman fishing on rocks and you're going to stand there for hours, a big wave's going to come sometimes. So that, and reporters would say this to me. They would say, I've come across this before. And this was the first time, because I was getting a lot of specific detail, that I was conscious of the fact that most drownings are predictable and are avoidable. Don't use preventable, but are avoidable. And the second thing was that in most cases, the public, as a means of method of rescue, choose swimming rescues over land-based rescues. Now, Brendan's done some work, and I've done work on this, and this is quite true. And some of you will have heard me mention last year the fact that if you want a life-saving medal for a rescue, you've got to make a swimming rescue. You get no gold medals, Tom, for making it a reaching rescue or a throwing rescue. But if you jump in and you almost die in your attempt to rescue Torrell, right? Guarantee you, you'll get a medal. And the newspapers will report it. Daring rescue. What they're reading is what we don't want them to do. Because the message is you're being rewarded for making the most dangerous type of rescue. This is the start. The key overriding principle. And it's this. I am responsible for my own safety. It's my responsibility. And if I have children or others in my care, then I am responsible for them. I may share that responsibility with lifeguards or with others, with the police or with Coast Guard, but it's my responsibility always. This notion of we'll bring the children into the pool and send them into the leisure centre, send them into the pool, and we'll go into the bar and I'll have a chat with the girls, or I'll have a look at the football match and the lifeguards will look after them. So this is the overriding responsibility, and acceptance that I am responsible for my own safety. So let's look at some of these skills. These are not new to you. There's nothing I'm going to say here that you won't probably agree with. But I think it's the combination, and it's this. You learn to swim in street clothing. Colin, I don't know whether Colin mentioned that in the suit when they teach them to swim, they teach them in street clothing. If you come in with a swimsuit, he'll let you swim this week, but he'll tell you next time you come in clothing. You learn to swim and you swim in your clothing. Learn to float on your back in street clothing. Learn how to remove clothing safely in water. Not only to remove it, but also to understand that at times it can be very difficult to remove clothing. And therefore, if you're going to make the decision that at least you will have had some previous experience, learn how to perform reaching and throwing rescues. And how to actually perform them. Learn CPR, infants, children and adults. Learn how to enter water in a life jacket. Drowning-resistant knowledge. If you can't breathe in water, you need to float on your back until you can. You don't remove clothing immediately. 2 reasons are: one, it reduces the effects of the cold, it gives you some insulation, and it contains buoyancy. So that even though you know how to remove clothing, you know that it's not a good idea to do so immediately. Understand that when you're in trouble, it's better to swim slowly. If you double your speed, you quadruple your energy requirement. And if you're drowning, and let me give you a definition of drowning, it's choking on water, right? If you're choking on water, you fall in, and the person says, I've got to get out as fast as I can, therefore I've got to swim as fast as I can, then you're burning up whatever oxygen you have in solution in your blood, and you're going to experience what's called sudden total swim failure. So it is better to swim slowly when you're in trouble. Never enter the water without being certain of where you're going to exit it. If you're not certain, if you're not absolutely certain where you're going to get out, you don't get in, because you may not be able to get out. Always enter water feet first, because it allows you to check for dangers you can feel with your feet, gives you time for your breathing to adjust. In other words, knowing that you're going to suffer the effects of cold, that as the cold hits, that gradually, if you're going to hyperventilate, at least you're going to be head up out of the water. Know that rescuers often drown. That it's not a rare thing, it's a common thing. And therefore, if you have a choice, if you have an option, you bring a rescue aid for yourself. There's a YouTube video that shows a rescue in somewhere in the Far East where it shows the rescuer swimming out with a ring bight to a girl who's drowning. He passes the ring bight to her, and he promptly starts to drown. She passes the ring bight back, and the two of them have to be rescued. It's on YouTube. And it shows quite clearly, and you see the instinctive drowning response. You see how he's head up and how he's pressing down in the water as such. So you bring a buoyant aid. You know that alcohol and water don't mix in recreation. And that you always wear a life jacket on water. You don't assume just because I can swim to do so. Understanding use touch supervision, and we've discussed that already. There's a few more. That bigger than normal waves arise often. That it's not a freak wave. It's not an unusual. People have this notion when you talk about waves that, well, it's going to be a 20-foot high wave, a sort of a mini tidal wave, and it's going to come once a year, once. It doesn't require a big wave to knock. I think someone mentioned previously that was a small enough wave. To knock over a child, if you're a fisherman fishing on rocks, right, it doesn't require much to knock you off those rocks. So, and that fishermen need a fast escape route. In other words, that if Peter is going to go fishing, and I know because he has some pictures where I'm talking to you about it, you're standing on rocks, and you're going to be there for hours, and you think, well, a big wave might come. Well, ask yourself the question, if a big wave does come, what am I going to do? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, is about the best thing, the only thing you can do if you're a Christian. Fishermen fall into water often. They wear waders. As I mentioned in the incident I just gave, one was wearing waders, one was wearing Wellingtons. know how to deal with ice, which arose from the presentations, and the other one, know how to escape from a submerging car. So this bit of knowledge. And then experience, the third aspect of it, to give people experience of what? That you practice swimming in clothing. That if someone is going to learn to swim, that as part of their learning to swim, of course, they would learn to swim in street clothing. They would learn to swim in plimsolls or runners, because the almost universal uniform now for teenagers or for young people are trainers, jeans, and a polo shirt or a sweatshirt or something like that. So that's what they're likely to fall into the water in, so that's what they should be wearing. Practice floating in clothing. Practice removing clothing in the pool and then in open water. As I said, not just learning how to do it, but learning that sometimes it's difficult to do. So that the person, at least from experience, would decide, well, I will or I won't. But knowing what the likely problems would be. Practice swimming without goggles. Because otherwise people are going to wiping their eyes. They're not used to it. Practice swimming blindfolded. Why blindfolded? Because, as mentioned earlier, quite a number of drownings take place in the dark. So therefore, blindfolding is an easy way to disorientate a person. It's a way of safely practicing swimming in the dark. Practice entering water in a life jacket, jumping in, so that you know that the pressure will push you up and that you can actually jump out of it, and swimming in one, so that the first time you do so isn't when you're in trouble. And again, learn that at different sizes, that a life jacket, if it's too big for a child, the child will fall out of it. The first time problem, I think I'm presenting a paper on this in Potsdam. The first time problem is this. It says the first time you swim in street clothing, the first time you swim in footwear, in open water and cold water without goggles, should not be when you're drowning. My proposal is that swimmers drown because they are overwhelmed by a number of new experiences, and by the time they adjust to all of them, they're dead or they're unconscious. And the exit problem. And the exit problem is, again, it's based on research, that some of those who drown do so because having swum to what they think as safety. In other words, we know that the majority of people drown within, say, 20 feet or even, let's say, 100 meters of safety. They don't drown because they can't swim 100 meters. They drown because, having swum to what they think is safety, they can't get out. Because one of the first things that happens in cold water is you lose your grip. You lose the ability to hold. The sides may be too steep. And if you're alone and there's no one to help you out, then you succumb to fatigue. Combination of all three, I believe, would greatly improve a person's survival possibilities were they to experience a sudden fall into cold water. And this is, I'm just going to skip through these. This is one that was in New Zealand, that now gets on YouTube, where a 12-year-old boy was swept out to sea. And there you see the human chain. Police formed the human chain. And I put this one in especially because it's Norwegian. The body of a Norwegian fisherman who fell into the water at 3 a.m. was recovered at 1 p.m. the following day. He was returning to his fishing trawler after a night out with his colleagues. This is St. Patrick's Day, just in case you don't know. This is in Ireland. He drowned in Ireland, right? And look, his friends who were a short distance behind him assumed that he had gone below to sleep. When they didn't see him, they assumed he'd gone below to sleep. What had actually happened was he'd fallen over the side. It was only when he didn't turn up for breakfast that they discovered and went looking for him. The following day, a Polish man who had been living in Ireland for a number of years drowned when he fell off rocks into the sea after being hit by a freak wave on a fishing trip with friends. The incident happened in an area notorious for freak waves, and local anglers tend to avoid the area. So, illustrations of bits and pieces. I believe it's possible for us to reverse that pyramid, to turn the 5 to 15 million down to about 1 million. I don't believe it's possible to eliminate drowning, and I thank you very much.
Any questions? Colin?
It's a comment rather than a question, but what you just put up on the screen about the man who fell off the boat on St. Patrick's Day
Yes.
and was assumed to be in his bunk, etc., etc. It reminded me of something I read many years ago. I think it was 1960, but people still travel between the continents by ship. Someone fell off one of the Union Castle liners coming back from South Africa, very late at night. Nobody knows why, although one guesses he was drunk. Nobody saw him fall. It was only when he didn't come down to breakfast the next day that people started wondering where he was. And a search was made of the ship and he couldn't be found, so the captain ordered the ship turned round and sailed back on a reciprocal course. They found him just before it got dark the following day. He'd been in the water for close on 24 hours. He was picked out and made a full recovery. I think he was fortunate in that this happened somewhere around the Canary Islands, where the water was warm enough for hypothermia not to be a problem, yet too cold for sharks. But I think what should we say, the real accolade should go to the ship's crew for keeping a lookout and finding something so small as a head in the water after 200 miles and not knowing even when they were likely to find it. Keeping such a first-class lookout and such a first-class accurate navigation.
Couple comments that I had in terms of what John mentioned. You mentioned about the articles and the interview with the newspapers. Every time we hear about a submerged vehicle incident, we either send a comment to the newspaper or we send an email to the newspaper author basically stating that if you'd like to educate the public about drowning prevention in vehicles, here's some information. We have never, ever received any feedback from those authors of the articles that, yes, they're going to do something to educate the people. I also get interviewed all the time by magazines and newspapers. I never, ever see the copies, except one day, Playboy had interviewed me, and all of a sudden one day I go to open my mailbox and there's a brown paper magazine, and I open it up and there's Playboy magazine, and sure enough, it took me about an hour to find the article, but it was in there. But John also mentioned about fishermen and waders. That's a whole other subject that really needs to be addressed because people are drowning in these, and unless they have an adequate closure system, they're going to fill with water and they're going to drown. And then in terms of cold water rescue, just John, when we teach ice rescue, we assume that every patient has not the ability to hold on, and we treat every one of them as an unconscious victim. But excellent presentation. Any other questions? John, I'll turn it over to you.
Taryn, sorry?
I just like your phrase drowning resistant guidelines because it really makes, I think, it makes me think that there's a chance of getting people aware that there is, that small chance is small, but it's very important, and that's what we're going to aim for. And you're not going to be a big heroic lifesaver, but you can make a difference with a small thing. So
thank you. Right, then if we can stop this and I can just do some final housekeeping closures. First of all, I just want to close this down, turn this off. These are, sorry, switch it off, yes.
Yes.
Hit it again.
Same one. Off. Yeah.
There we go.
Vacuum first?
Yep.
It's 5:30, and I must send an email to Kevin Moran telling him we finished on time. In spite of, Kevin has this thing about, as you know, I send out stuff, and for 2010, last time Kevin was here, I was at 2011, there were 4 versions of the final program, which started off with small f final, and then you had final, 2 small f's, then you had capital F, final, small f, final, until eventually we got to version 4, which had capital final program, which, like today, didn't actually become the final program. I want to thank you for taking the time and to come here and to join us and to share your knowledge and your experiences with us. One of the things that we are trying to do is to promote an awareness of the benefit of research. Lifesaving in Ireland, lifesaving in Britain particularly, well, certainly within Irish Water Safety and within the Royal Lifesaving Society, they do not have a culture of research. The RLSS tends to borrow from RLSS Australia or RLSS Canada, although they are now starting to do some research, particularly in relation to pool lifeguard programs and things. But in general, lifesavers, and the easiest way to illustrate that is that very few Irish lifesavers who can just come. There are hundreds of Irish lifesavers within half an hour of this vicinity. They don't come. They don't see it as their only concern is what's in the manual. If it's not in the manual, don't need to know it. If I don't need to know it, don't want to know it. And Brenda and I are finding now that there is a community, there is a sort of life-saving research community worldwide. When we go to Potsdam, we're going to meet a lot of people we met in Vietnam, a lot of people we met in Porto, and some of them the same people we met in Amsterdam as such. So,
and some of the same people we met here.
Yes. And we think this is a good thing. So we're trying to say to people, look, there is a need for research. Most of what was originally in life-saving manuals was the opinion of the Victorians, and I have a great respect for the Victorians because of their knowledge, but everything they said wasn't right. Somebody had to think up, well, what I always think of as the front surface approach. I don't know if any of you are aware of the front surface approach, which says that the rescuer swims directly into the casualty. Right? That's crazy. You want to get clutched without any doubt. But someone, and it was in the manual for years, so there needs to be a research basis. So that's one of the things. And one of the things the foundation is trying to do is to promote research, to bring people who are involved in research together, to build relationships and friendships, and then to make that research available to others, which is why we have Ian here, and he's now an expert on drowning. And by the time he has this edited, he will be one of the most knowledgeable people in Ireland on certain aspects of drowning.
I have to say, it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank everybody. I lived on the water in Ireland for 10 years, and I owned the only and ran the only inland waterways marina on the east coast for about 3 or 4 years. And all of this is completely new information for me, which is unbelievable. And there is a huge community out there living out on the waters in Ireland that I know don't have any of this information. I think it's certainly something I'll be taking on board to push this stuff to these people, because these are the people I know of a person who ended up in the water. We had that situation. We've had bodies taken out of the water in our inland waterways, and we've been involved in that. And all of this is information that could have provided that if I had it a number of years ago. It's very interesting. Thank you.
I would just like to say a few things about the foundation, because we started this conversation last night in the bar.
Maybe we should end.
No, we'll do it here, speak, and then we can continue it in the bar. The foundation started out, as Brendan in the presentation, within the RLSS, but is now completely independent. We have more international members than we have Irish members. A lot of our members internationally are researchers. We have members on 4 continents who are some of the most senior people within Lifesaving worldwide. And I now take it for granted that if someone asks me a question, it's one of the things that frequently happens, they want some information, that I can send an email to almost any person, you know, be it medical or be it rescue, and say, look, you know, someone wants to know this, can you help them? And it comes back. It's now something I take for granted, the fact that the ability to do this. And what we're trying to do now is, we've been going for 10 years. We are under financial strain purely because resources, money in Ireland is drying up. And one of the things that, talking to Waterford City River Rescue and File Search and Rescue, not so much for File but certainly for Waterford, is the fact that money is in short supply. So therefore, we're moving more internationally to look at it. And to do it, we will now stop and we will look at how we can service the needs of our members. And one of the things we're trying to do is to make new research available by sourcing it and by putting it on our website. And it's how we do that better is one of the things that we will need to do. We've almost for the last 4 months done nothing other just the administration that goes with this conference, with finishing the last one, and it was an absolutely mad idea. I don't know, Brendan, who had this idea of having 2 conferences within 7 months of one another. It was sheer lunacy.
I can tell you who it was.
And it will be September, October 2014 by the time we come again, to put a gap in between. But there is a lot of information out there, and we want to make it available to people in the developing world. We also want to make it available to lifesavers. It may surprise Tom and Jerry, but most lifesavers don't know that if they go onto your websites, that there's a whole load of good stuff there, right? So we want to make them aware of that. We're also trying to simplify some of the stuff. One of the things that we're trying to do, and I know this has been tried in other areas, is to produce comics. And we've developed or agreed to have a relationship with our local third level institution in Waterford, with the art department, where they will start to produce comics so that a lot of stuff can be done visually. We don't know how successful it will be, but we're going to give it a try. And the idea is that if there's a leaflet, if there's information, that it would be possible for someone to reproduce it in their own language and download it, print it off. If you have a computer, access to the internet, and a printer, that you can print up your own stuff. The other thing is working through scouting, and Ron has come on board with this as well, that we are trying to develop some type of formal relationship with international scouting to promote water safety through scouting. To piggyback, and that's the truth, to piggyback water safety on scouting. I know it can be done because 20 years ago I did it myself in Ireland when I went into, I had been in scouting and then I had left, and there were a number of drownings of scouts who drowned, and I was asked to go back in to scouting, and I rewrote part of the manual of the scouting trail, which is the manual, and wrote the water safety sections for what's now the Irish version of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, or we call it Goshka here. So, if you're interested, there are membership forms there. It's €50 a year, and there is no other commitment. We will keep you informed, and we will develop, as I say, our aim for the next 6 months is to develop the services that we offer our members.